Welcome to Rad Sib Spotlight, a podcast for parents and siblings of children with reactive attachment disorder. Our special guest today is Johnny, sharing his story as a sibling of Rad.
My name is Johnny, and I have 6 siblings, actually, 2 biological brothers, 2 adopted siblings, 2 sisters with Rad, and then I have 2 adopted brothers who also have Rad. And then both of my adopted brothers are older than me, and then I have 1 adopted sister that's older than me and 1 adopted sister that's younger than me. I'm 19 years old, and I've been homeschooled my whole life. I've always really liked science, especially psychology. I'm really interested in psychology. And then also I have a lot of passion for video game design. I'm really interested in the intricacies of how you create something like that, especially virtual reality video games, especially this one game called Beat Saber. I'm one of the top player in the world. Yeah, I know. I'm obsessed. So that's just one of the biggest passions for me. So growing up, I wasn't really able to play with my siblings very much because as for the 3 adopted siblings that were older than me, they had a tendency to be sort of violent and have very aggressive tendencies, and that made things really tense between them, so I wasn't really able to play with them. And then for my younger adopted sibling, mental delays that made it really hard to play with her in the sense that you normally would with a sibling. So I never really had a lot of playtime with my adopted siblings. And fortunately, though, that allowed me to go really close to my biological siblings. So that's definitely a positive out of the negatives. I don't really remember a lot of the things that happened, except for a general sense of a lot of tension and just a lot of aggression. But I feel like that's ultimately for the best for my sake. One of the major things that made it really difficult to be able to live with siblings with Rad is to be able to see the effect it had on my parents. Because while I did have to live in that environment, it wasn't my responsibility to approach that. And I've had so many times that one or both of my parents just came back from a confrontation just crying, and just, I think seeing them so broken over what my siblings had done was one of the most hurtful things to me. And I remember just being so hard to watch that happen, and I remember just this sense of uneasiness that creates. And I remember just, for example, once one of my siblings just became really aggressive out of nowhere and just took a pair of scissors and tried to cut my mom's hair just out of nowhere. And that was just really terrifying to see them attack her in that way. And I just remember having so many times where they would yell at her and argue with her, and that I remember just being, for my mom and also for my dad, that whenever he would have to get involved in the confrontation, that they would be very aggressive with him, and that it would just leave them so hurt that they would sacrifice so much. And I just remember thinking that there was just something that had to be done, and that's what kind of led us to allow them to leave the home. Sometimes you feel like if you just sacrifice enough, then you'll just be able to fix just all the issues that maybe the sib with Rad has. And that's just not the case sometimes, is that while we can be called by God to sacrifice for their sake, is that doesn't always work. For example, where we used to live, I had this job that I really liked with a lot of coworkers I really enjoyed, and I had just been offered a promotion to the director of hospitality, including a raise. And right at the same time that happened, literally I think in less than a week, we found a house that we thought would work really well for our situation. And we talked to my younger sister about it, and she said that she would really like to move there and that would make her happy. So we really hoped that being able to live in this new environment would help her more. And then for that reason, I sacrificed that job, I sacrificed that raise and that promotion, and I moved here. And then once we got here, she resented us for it. She was angry at us for it. And it felt like I had made such a sacrifice that had been returned with anger. And it felt like it didn't have any effect. And that was really discouraging to me. But I feel like that's really something you can learn from, is that it's very important to do the right thing, but also to go into it with the understanding that that won't always be received in the way that you hope for. How did I talk with my parents about the situation with my rad siblings, if at all? I didn't for most of the earlier years until sort of my late teens. And I feel like that talking it through with them really helped our relationship, because one of the major things that I wanted to make really clear to them is that I didn't resent them for anything that happened. We still did talk about how it made us feel, and that it did make things very difficult for us sometimes, but that I just want to make it very clear that I didn't resent them for that. And then also that not only that, but both me and my biological brothers were actually proud of our parents for following God's will, because we really did feel called to adopt. And even though that was really hard, it came at a lot of sacrifices, it really just felt like the right thing to do. And I feel like ultimately following God's will is more important than avoiding getting hurt. So after talking that through with them, I feel like it just really helped both of us understand where we stood on that and how we felt about the fact that it all happened. So looking back on a lot of the things that had happened between how we tried to cope with everything, and I found that one of the couple of things that helped me the most is having a relationship with God, and making that one of my highest priorities is to pray and worship and to read the word and to try and draw wisdom from that. I feel like that's one of the best resources you can ever have. And then another major resource, one of the most important ones, is your family, and making sure that those who are willing to love you and support you and guide you through that hard process, making sure that you stay as close to them as you can, encouraging each other, being there for each other, putting each other's needs above your own. And even when you're hurt, understanding that you are all there for each other, that you're willing to work through that, and just never giving up on that relationship with each other, even if it becomes very hard. I feel like that's something that I found really helped, is that no matter what situation came up, because there are a lot of different situations that can come up, but no matter what comes up, being able to encourage each other is one of the most important things you can ever do. And being able to stay close to them is one of the most important things you can ever do. It was definitely a major adjustment. And while it did kind of, it gave me a lot of conflicted feelings, because on one hand, it's people that I've spent a lot of time with, but on the other hand, it was also a major relief to be able to have peace in the home again. And I felt like it was the right thing to do, even if it was hard to make that decision, both since my older siblings had just grown a little bit older and had moved out, and then my younger sibling, my younger sister, had been put in a program. Both of those, all those decisions were really hard to make. But as time went on after that had happened, there's sort of this peace that comes with it, where after it's over and you've had a little time to heal, you're able to look back and reflect on what had happened. And even if you know that it's the right decision at the time, or even if you don't and you choose to do it out of hope that you're doing the right thing, there's sort of this clarity that comes after you've already done it. And I feel like while it was very difficult to make that adjustment at first, there's a lot of peace that also comes with it later. I remember having that conversation and wanting to hold on to those siblings because we wanted to help them, because we were willing to make sacrifices to be obedient to God, and then also having this moment of understanding how much we had been through, and that there comes a point where you need to put their lives in God's hand when you've done everything that God's asked of you and there's nothing else you can do anymore. I just remember having this moment of clarity, of understanding that we had done what was required of us. And I remember that being very hard to move on from, but looking back gives me a lot of peace, knowing that we did the right thing and that we did everything that we could to sacrifice and to be obedient. And I am just very grateful that that's over now. for one thing, that it wasn't going to last forever, is that it would get better. I would be able to heal. I'd be able to move on from everything that had happened, all the trauma. And also, I would have really liked to have been able to understand and have known that everything that was happening was for a purpose. It was to mold my character. It was to glorify God with my actions and being obedient, and that everything that was happening, that there was a plan in it, that I wasn't just suffering through it just to suffer, just because it was unjust. There was a purpose for all of it, and that it wasn't going to be forever, and that I would be rewarded for that through whatever change in character or molding that would happen there. Is that I would have really liked to have known that there is an end, and that things can get better, and that I'll ultimately be a better person because it happened. As for my relationships with friends and extended family with Rads in the home, is that it was really hard to have anybody over, both friends and family, because there was always this element of chaos in the home. It was really hard to invite people over to our house because we weren't able to just hang out with them peacefully. We weren't able to have that sort of connection unless we were outside of the house. And that was very hard for us, and it made it really hard to maintain close friendships sometimes when you're not able to have them over. But there was a really positive aspect of that, because me and my biological brothers became best friends with each other. We always have been, and we still are, even though we did face a lot of trouble staying close to extended family and friends because we didn't want to expose them to that. And it was very hard for us to be able to connect with them in a way that wouldn't get them involved in all of the chaos. So I feel like while that was a major sacrifice we had to make, is that ultimately it brought us closer together. And I feel like that's something that, even though you won't have friends all your life, you should have family all your life. And even if your extended family isn't around all the time, is that you have your immediate family that you can hold on to and you can trust. And I feel like bringing us together in that way, I'm very grateful for that. And even though it did make it very hard to have other people around, I'm grateful for the way that things happen, because I understand that God orchestrated it that way for a reason, for our good, for our benefit. So as for my healing from all these experiences, when they happened and how it happened, I feel like when my older 3 siblings left the home, because they tend to be the most aggressive ones, at least my older 3 adopted siblings, is that started the healing, but still having one of them in the home caused that healing to feel incomplete, because while we felt like a lot of it was gone, as long as one was still in the home, it was hard to have peace, and it was hard for things to feel like they were under control. And so while that healing did kind of start at first, it took a little bit of time after we had gotten my younger sister into therapy before things really started to heal for us. And the way that we healed is just always encouraging each other, being there for each other, and we just needed to have peace in the home. And healing can be very hard, but that doesn't mean it has to be complicated. The important part is just that you have people you can rely on, and you have people who love you, and that you stay close to them. And over time, the hurts that were inflicted on you start to go away because of all of the support that you get from the people who are there for you. And I believe that the best way to heal is, all you really need is to just bond with people who won't break that trust, with people who, even if you don't always agree, even if you do fight sometimes, the important part is that you're able to trust them ultimately, that they want what's best for you, and that they wouldn't create that element of chaos in the home. And over time, the things that the Rads had done started to fade away from the front of my mind because they weren't around anymore, that wasn't happening anymore, and those feelings that caused me stress and tension and anxiety kind of started to go away because that wasn't being triggered in us anymore. So I feel like ultimately the way to heal is just to find the way to create that peace in your home and to be able to bond with the people who are able to support you. And I feel like if you just let that happen long enough, if you open yourself up to trust again after being hurt, then that's what really will ultimately help you heal. I have a couple pieces of advice for everyone who might still be struggling with a sibling with RAD or multiple siblings with RAD. And the first and foremost thing, and I know I keep saying this over and over, that's because it's so important to understand that you keep your relationship with God as close and as strong as you possibly can, is that it can feel like sometimes when you're very hurt and very angry about the type of things that have happened because you obeyed God, is that you can feel the need to rebel against him. And the truth is that you need to go closer to God and stronger to God than ever. And I know that can be really hard to do, especially it can be hard to trust God when you see these things happening, when you see that you obey God and then you get hurt by it. And it can feel like you're being punished for being obedient to God. It can be really hard to understand that that's just something that will ultimately work for your good. But it's very important to never lose faith and to understand that even if it feels like it'll never end, even if it feels like it'll never get better, even if it feels like everything is ruined or that you'll always feel this anxiety or hurt or anything that you might be dealing with, is that whatever you're going through right now, God has a plan to both grow you through it and mold you through it, and that also that you will be rewarded for it. You might not know the way that you'll be rewarded for it. You might not see a way that it can ever work for your good, but I guarantee God does have a purpose and a reason that he's doing this. And then also, on a similar note, is that a lot of time when you are hurting or angry for what's happening in your life, you can feel like you need to rebel against your parents. You can say, you chose to adopt this child, and now they're hurting me, and now they're making me angry, and now they're insulting me, and now they're taking my things. And all these things can happen, and they might still be happening to you, and you can feel like you need to rebel against them for that. The truth is that they were called to serve God, and they were called to do this to glorify God, and that even though it can be so hard to trust that this is the right thing, and maybe there does come a time where you need to let go, but there's also a time where you are called to sacrifice, and that can be really hard to do, especially while you're sacrificing for the person that continues to hurt you. Is that rebelling against your parents is one of the worst things. That's one of the worst options you could ever go for in this type of situation. And it can be really hard to not let those feelings of anger take control of you, but it's really important that you don't. And it's really important that you take this opportunity not to rebel against your parents and against your family. If you do have other siblings other than the ones with RAD, it's very important that you stay as close to them as you can, and that you're there to support each other and to encourage each other, because rebelling against them and trying to make your own way is one of the surefire ways to get you more hurt in the long run. Because with that type of hurt, the only way, I believe, one of the only ways you can heal from that is to heal with the people who truly care about you and the people who will support you, and to stay close to your parents especially, and that no matter what, always stay with them, always put each other's needs above your own, no matter how hard it gets. And I know that it can feel like when you're being hurt in this way, it feels like there's nothing more you can give, it feels like there's nothing more you can do, and it feels like if you try to encourage each other rather than fend for yourself, that you just can't make it through. the truth is that you have to give to each other and you have to look out for each other to make it through, because that's how you'll stay strong, that's how you'll stay close, and ultimately that's how you will have the strength to push through and then heal afterwards. So to recap, just stay close to God, stay close to your parents, stay close to your family. What I would really like for parents with kids that have RAD to know is that whatever your child does, while it is your responsibility to support your children and to help them, is that it is not your responsibility to make decisions for your RAD kids, because you can't. You just can't control what someone will do. You can't control what someone will say. You can't control the decisions they will make. No matter what that RAD kid does, that's not something that you created or you caused. And even if it feels like you might not just love them enough, or you might not have sacrificed enough, and you just need to do more and more and more, is that might come from a place of wanting to nurture them like you have with your biological children. And while that is very important, and I do encourage you to always nurture them, always be there for your adopted and biological kids, it's important to understand that their actions are not always your fault. And it can feel like it's your fault because you didn't control them or you didn't watch them closely enough. But the truth is, it is physically impossible to always watch them all the time and never allow them to make a bad decision. They have a lot of turbulence in their feelings and their actions and their words. Sometimes when those kinds of feelings are directed at you, it can feel like a response to what you have done. But it's really important to understand that you can do everything right. You can be completely obedient to God. You can love them and nurture them to the very best of your ability. And sometimes they just don't take that in the way that you would like them to. And sometimes that's a decision that they make, and sometimes it's an inability to feel safe. But either way, that's not your fault that it happens. You did everything that you could, and you tried as hard as you could, and I know that you love them so much, and it can feel really hard to see them walk through that and make those decisions and see them torn up inside. But what's really important to know is that you're doing the best you can, and as long as you stay obedient to God, you're doing what you need to do. And that you might carry a lot of guilt for children that might be abused and mistreated by the kids with RAD. And it's really important to understand that even though I'm sure you want to protect them more than you would ever want to protect yourself, is that there comes a point where obedience to God can require sacrifice, not only from you, but also from your kids. If you have a child that comes in the home who has RAD, that sometimes there's only so much you can do to control their actions and control their words, and that when those things inevitably do happen, that they mistreat you and your other kids, is that that's not your fault. And it's okay to express the way that it makes you feel, because I feel like a lot of time, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is that if you have a lot of mental disorders like RAD, is that it can cause you to become manipulative, and sometimes that causes people to stay quiet about things. So I feel like that's one reason that's really good to have a lot of testimonies. And then another reason is because while I really hope that my testimony can help some people, I also understand that sometimes different people feel different ways about something, or there's just something else they need to hear, and sometimes different personalities, different testimonies click in different ways. So I feel like just getting as many testimonies as you can is the best thing you could do, because even if you have 19 testimonies out of 20 that don't really help, you can have that one person that says something that changes their life.
Rad Sibs Spotlight, bringing the Sibs back into focus.